The wind cut across the desert like a sharp knife, carrying the dust and heat of the unforgiving land. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the jagged rocks and the scattered remnants of old settlements. In the distance, the faint outline of a horse stirred against the horizon, its rider moving with a calm that belonged to the land itself, a rhythm known only to those who had been born under the vast, empty skies of the West. The woman leaned against the edge of a crumbling stone wall, her breath shallow, her hands trembling with exhaustion and fear. Her eyes scanned the barren stretch of earth around her, searching for any sign of life, any promise of safety. She had been walking for days, or maybe weeks. Time had lost all meaning in the relentless heat. She whispered a prayer under her breath, a plea that felt both desperate and fragile. I prayed for someone to find me. Was it you whom God sent? The words slipped into the quiet, carried by the wind, unsure if they were meant for the sky above or the man approaching through the haze. The Apache stood a few paces away, his silhouette tall and unyielding. His eyes, dark and knowing, seemed to measure her from head to toe without judgment, reading the lines of fear and hope etched into her face. The woman studied him as if she were trying to unravel a riddle, unsure if she should trust the figure who appeared like a ghost out of the desert heat. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen. The ridges of his face were sharp, defined by years of living with the sun and the wind, and his hair fell long and dark across his shoulders. Every movement he made was deliberate, as though the world around him existed only to follow the path he chose. There was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, a sense of balance with the land that seemed almost sacred. The woman had heard stories of the Apache, their courage, their skill, their fierce independence, but never had she imagined that she would meet one in the vast emptiness of the desert. At a moment when her own life had been reduced to prayer and hope, the landscape around them was harsh, unforgiving. The sun scorched the earth by day, and the nights were bitter with cold that seeped into the bones. The remains of old camps dotted the land, silent witnesses to travelers who had vanished or survived by sheer will. Sand and rocks stretched endlessly, but even in this emptiness there was a sense of quiet life. Birds wheeled overhead, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the low rumble of a distant herd reminded her that she was not truly alone. Yet the woman had felt more alone than ever. Wandering through the endless expanse with nothing but the memory of what had been lost to guide her, she shifted slightly, the weight of her desperation heavy on her shoulders. Every sound, every movement made her heart leap. But when she saw the figure draw closer, something within her stirred a fragile thread of hope that refused to break. "I did not know if anyone would come," she said, her voice low and steady, despite the tremor she tried to hide. "I prayed. And yet, even when the wind answered, I thought it was only my own voice returned to me." The Apache stopped a few feet from her, his dark eyes holding hers without a word. There was a quiet understanding in the silence, a recognition of shared struggle, even if the worlds they came from were miles apart. The woman felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Something had shifted in the air, something that felt larger than either of them. It was as if the land itself had held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. He finally spoke, his voice low and calm, carrying the rough cadence of the land he had grown with. "You should not be here alone," he said. There was no judgment in his words, only observation. The woman swallowed, unsure whether relief or fear came first. She wanted to ask him how he had found her, but the words stuck somewhere between her heart and her lips. The desert was wide, merciless, and there were many ways to lose oneself. Yet here he was, a presence that seemed impossible and yet entirely real. The woman's eyes drifted to the horizon again, thinking of the path she had taken, the mistakes she had made and the people she had lost. She had come to the desert seeking something she could not name, something beyond fear and grief, beyond pain and survival. And now, standing before the Apache, she wondered if perhaps she had found it not in answers, but in the silent promise of someone who understood what it meant to endure. He extended a hand, not in threat, but as a gesture that bridged the gap between strangers and allies. The woman hesitated, glancing at the rugged ground between them, then back to his steady gaze. There was a story in his eyes, a depth of life that spoke of battles fought and lands traversed, a history written across the lines of his face. She sensed that this was not just chance, not just the randomness of the wind bringing him to her side. There was purpose here, though she could not yet understand it. Around them, the desert seemed to shift, as if acknowledging the meeting of two worlds, one broken, one fierce and enduring. The wind swirled, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and for a moment, the sun hung directly above, casting a glow that felt almost sacred. It was a fragile piece. A pause before the storm of whatever journey lay ahead. She finally took his hand. The contact brief yet electric, grounding her in the reality of his presence. There was a silent agreement, an understanding that whatever dangers the desert held, they would face them together, at least for this moment. The Apache's eyes scanned the horizon, alert, protective, as if he could see what she could not, threats lurking in the sand, whispers of danger riding on the wind. And though she did not fully understand him, she trusted that he could keep her safe. At least until the next challenge revealed itself. The desert held its breath, as if waiting to see what would unfold next. The woman could feel the weight of unanswered questions pressing against her chest, who she could trust. What lay beyond the hills, and whether the prayers she had sent into the sky had truly been answered. She knew that the road ahead would be perilous, that danger and uncertainty were constant companions in these lands. Yet the presence of the Apache gave her a flicker of courage she had thought long buried. They stood together, two figures against the vast emptiness, each marked by loss and resilience, each carrying their own burdens and secrets. The woman's heart raced, not from the harshness of the sun or the chill of the coming night, but from the realization that she was no longer entirely alone. And yet, even in this moment of fragile hope, the question remained: had she truly been saved, or was this merely the beginning of a deeper trial that the desert had prepared for her? The wind whispered around them, carrying with it the sound of distant coyotes and the faint rustle of something moving just beyond sight. The woman glanced at the Apache, her hand still in his, and felt a strange mixture of fear, relief, and curiosity. She had prayed for someone to find her, and he was here. But the land was vast, the dangers many, and the mysteries of the desert were far from understood. And then, without another word, he turned and began walking toward a trail that led through the canyon, his movement steady and sure. She followed, her mind racing with questions, her heart heavy with both hope and uncertainty. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the rugged landscape, and the desert seemed to watch them as they moved, silent and eternal. The woman realized she had crossed a threshold, leaving behind the world she had known and stepping into a story written in dust, wind, and courage. She did not know what lay ahead, whether salvation or further trials, but she knew that for the first time in days, perhaps weeks, she was not walking alone. And as the canyon walls rose around them, narrowing the path and deepening the shadows, the woman's voice whispered into the wind once more, a prayer that mingled with the dust and the dusk. Was it truly you whom God sent? The Apache did not answer, his gaze fixed ahead, alert to the unseen, and the desert held its secrets, leaving the question hanging in the air, unresolved, as if the land itself demanded patience before revealing its truths. The canyon walls rose around them like silent sentinels, their jagged edges cutting the fading light into long, sharp shadows. The woman followed the Apache closely, her steps uncertain but determined. The ground underfoot was uneven, littered with loose stones and the occasional tumbleweed caught in the narrowing path. She could hear the soft, deliberate rhythm of his boots striking the earth, a sound that somehow gave her both comfort and unease. Every instinct she had screamed to trust him. Yet the desert had a way of teaching harsh lessons, and she could not forget how alone she had been before he appeared as they walked. The woman tried to piece together the fragments of her memory. She had been traveling east, away from the settlements that had once felt familiar, but now seemed alien and hostile. The journey had begun with a simple purpose: to escape. Escape the memories of loss, the lingering fear that had settled in her chest like a heavy stone. But the desert, vast and indifferent, had a way of stripping away pretense. It revealed the truth in small, merciless ways: the dry mouth from thirst, the blistering sun against her skin, the emptiness of night that swallowed all sound except the whisper of wind. The Apache spoke for the first time since they had entered the canyon, his voice calm, but carrying a quiet authority that demanded attention. "The desert does not forgive carelessness," he said. "Every step must be measured. Every decision carries weight. You must remember this if you intend to survive." She nodded, though her stomach twisted at the thought. Survival had become more than a word. It was the pulse beneath her skin, the thing that had kept her moving when hope felt like a distant dream. "I've learned that," she said softly, though the truth was, she had learned it too late many times. He glanced at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing her words against the rhythm of the land itself. "You speak of learning, but the desert will teach you in its own way. Some lessons are paid for in blood, others in silence, and some in waiting." The words unsettled her. She had already felt the cost of waiting, the terror of being unseen, unheard, forgotten. She had wandered into this canyon not knowing whether she sought safety or punishment. And now she wondered if the man beside her was a protector or merely another shadow in the desert's long story. They continued walking in silence, the wind carrying the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. The woman's mind drifted to the Apache's face, the sharp lines, the depth of his eyes, and she felt a strange sense of recognition, as if the land had drawn him to her for reasons she could not yet understand. There was a story behind those eyes, one that spoke of battles fought and dangers faced. Yet the woman sensed a quiet sorrow there as well. She wanted to ask about it, to unravel the life he carried within him, but something in the canyon's hush made her hesitate. Questions, she realized, could wait. After some time, the path opened into a small clearing, shaded by rock formations that jutted out like ancient guardians. The Apache stopped and crouched by a narrow crevice, inspecting the ground. The woman peered over his shoulder, noticing faint tracks that led from one side of the canyon to another. "Someone passed this way recently," he said, almost to himself. "Not long ago." They knew the land. Her heart thudded. She had thought herself alone, the last person in this forsaken stretch of earth, yet the tracks suggested otherwise. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The Apache did not answer immediately. He only studied the tracks, tracing them with careful fingers, his expression unreadable. "They moved like someone who knew where to hide," he said finally. "Someone who is cautious. Dangerous, perhaps, if crossed." The woman felt a chill creep over her, a reminder that the desert was never truly empty. She had prayed for someone to find her, and now she wondered if she had also invited the attention of those who would do her harm. The Apache rose, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "We must keep moving," he said. "Night falls soon, and there is safety beyond the ridge. But you must understand nothing here is given freely. The land tests everyone." She nodded, clutching her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders. As they moved, the woman remembered the night she had first realized she could no longer rely on towns or people she once knew. The shadows had fallen quickly, and fear had pressed against her chest like a vice. She had wandered blindly, driven by desperation, and it had been a prayer whispered into the emptiness that had led the Apache to her. Perhaps God had sent him, or perhaps the desert had, but either way, her fate had shifted that day. The story of the Apache slowly unfolded in her mind as they walked. He was a man of the land, born into the rhythm of survival and hardship. His people had taught him the ways of the desert, the secrets of water and shelter, and the knowledge of how to move unseen. Yet he carried more than knowledge. There was a history of conflict etched in his movements, a memory of battles fought and alliances formed and broken. The woman realized that beneath his calm exterior, there was a lifetime of experiences she could scarcely imagine. By the time the sun had dipped below the ridge, casting the canyon into shades of purple and gray, they had traveled far enough that the first hints of danger in the darkness became apparent. The wind carried the scent of smoke from a distant fire, and the subtle sound of hooves or movement across the rocky plains. The woman's pulse quickened. She knew instinctively that the desert was speaking to them, warning them that they were not alone. The Apache led her to a small hollow, partially hidden by boulders and low shrubs. Here the night wind was less fierce, and the ground offered some comfort from the harsh terrain. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, sinking gratefully onto the dry earth. Her body ached, muscles stiff from constant movement, but there was a sense of cautious relief in the shelter they had found. As the darkness deepened, the woman watched him prepare a small fire. He moved with precision, gathering dry twigs and stones, igniting the flames with a skill born of necessity. She marveled at the quiet mastery of his actions, the way he seemed to belong to this world, every movement purposeful, every gesture reflecting a life lived in constant harmony with danger. When the fire was steady, the Apache looked at her again, his eyes reflecting the flickering light. "You are far from home," he said softly, "and yet here you are, walking a path few would dare. Tell me, why did you come to this place?" The woman hesitated. Part of her wanted to confess everything's losses, the fears, the desperate prayer that had carried her to this moment. But another part of her remained guarded, aware that the desert did not forgive naivety. She swallowed, letting the words come slowly. I had nowhere else to go. I needed to escape what I was running from, and I prayed someone would find me before it was too late." The Apache nodded, as if he understood far more than she had said. "The desert listens," he said, "but it does not always answer in ways we expect. It tests patience, courage, and judgment. Many who come here are not prepared for the truths they will face." The woman felt the weight of his words settle over her, mingling with the smoke and the chill of night. She realized that her journey had only begun, that the desert held stories far older and harsher than her own, and that survival depended on more than hope. It required understanding, skill, and sometimes a willingness to confront truths that frightened the heart. As the fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows on the canyon walls, the woman allowed herself to glance at the Apache once more. There was a story in his eyes, one of loyalty, loss, and survival. And she sensed that whatever path lay ahead, he would be both a guide and a mystery. She wanted to know him, to unravel the threads of his life. But she also knew the desert demanded focus. That curiosity could be dangerous if it distracted from the task of surviving the night. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying sounds that might have been threats or merely echoes of the land. The woman's eyes strained to pierce the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. Somewhere out there, in the vast and silent desert, she felt the presence of others, watching, waiting, moving through the shadows. Her pulse quickened with anticipation and fear. The Apache sensed it too. He shifted, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of a knife at his waist, alert to the unseen. For the first time since she had been lost in the desert, the woman felt a strange mix of fear and trust. She had prayed for someone to find her, and he was here. Yet the night was long, and the shadows of the desert promised that the trials ahead were far from over. Whatever had brought her to this canyon, whatever had carried the Apache to her side, it was only the beginning of a story written in dust, wind, and vigilance. And as the fire crackled and the night deepened, the woman realized that the desert held more than challenges, it held secrets, and survival would mean uncovering them. But in the darkness, she could not yet see what waited beyond the ridge. And the mystery of the night hung heavily between them, unresolved, demanding patience, courage, and unwavering attention. The night stretched on, vast and unbroken, with only the fire flickering against the walls of the canyon to keep the darkness at bay. The woman sat close to the warmth, her arms wrapped around herself, but the comfort was fleeting. Every sound of the desert, the rustle of dry brush, the distant cry of a coyote, the low hum of wind over rock, kept her alert. Her mind churned with questions about the man beside her, the Apache whose presence had become both a shield and a mystery. She could not yet decipher. He had not spoken much since their last exchange. His eyes, dark and constant, scanned the shadows as though reading the land for threats she could not see. She wondered what had brought him here, why he had answered her silent plea. The air between them was heavy with unspoken histories, and she realized that to understand him, she would have to learn the rhythm of the desert itself. The fire crackled, and he moved with quiet precision, arranging stones to protect the flames from the wind. "There are others out there," he said eventually, his voice low. "Not all who wander are lost like you. Some are hunters. Some seek revenge." His words made her stomach twist. The desert was not only a place of survival, it was a crucible. And the fires of old grudges burned as brightly as the sun overhead. She shifted closer to him, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You could leave." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he traced a finger along a groove in the stone beside the fire, as if reading the story written in the land itself. "I do not leave those who cannot protect themselves," he said finally. "And there are things in this desert that cannot be faced alone. You are not ready for them." Yet, the words sank into her like a weight. She had come to the desert, seeking refuge, hoping to escape the troubles she carried. But now she understood that danger was never far behind. The desert had its own rules, and the past, both hers and his, was a current that could drag them under if they were not careful. As the night deepened, she remembered the people she had fled, the shadows of towns that now seemed distant and meaningless. Betrayal had followed her like a second skin, and the memory of it was sharp, cutting, impossible to ignore. Every step she had taken had been guided by a mix of fear and hope, and now, standing at the edge of this canyon, she realized that survival was only the beginning. The desert demanded more: clarity, courage, and the willingness to face truths she had long avoided. The Apache seemed to sense her thoughts. "The desert does not forgive the past," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the fire. "It demands that you face what you carry inside. Only then can you move forward. Only then can you hope to survive." She wanted to ask him about his past, about the battles he had fought and the lives he had known, but she held back. There was a weight to his silence that suggested the stories he carried were not for casual ears. Instead, she let the firelight wash over her, listening to the wind as it swept through the canyon, carrying whispers of danger and caution somewhere beyond the walls of the canyon. She thought there were people watching, waiting, planning. The desert had taught her to read the signs the way the shadows fell, the disturbed sand, the faint tracks that disappeared into the horizon. She felt a pulse of unease, a certainty that their journey would not be simple. And yet, there was also a thread of something she could not name, a feeling that, in this vast, merciless place, they were not entirely powerless. Hours passed, marked only by the slow movement of the fire and the quiet shifts of the Apache. She began to notice the small details of his presence, the way he carried his knife, the subtle movements of his shoulders, the way his gaze never wandered from the land more than a moment. He was a man who had lived with danger all his life. She was beginning to understand that survival depended on more than strength or courage. It required knowledge, patience, and a kind of quiet vigilance that she had yet to learn. In the early hours before dawn, the woman stirred. Sleep had been fleeting, filled with fragmented dreams of towns burning, faces she could not place, and the endless expanse of the desert. She had never known fear like this, not entirely fear of being lost, of being unseen, of being hunted. And now, with the Apache beside her, she felt the tension of the night pressing in on both of them, a shared awareness of danger that was almost tangible. He stirred as well, lifting his head to scan the canyon. "We are not alone," he said quietly. His voice carried a note of warning, calm but firm. She followed his gaze into the darkness, straining to see beyond the firelight. Something moved among the rocks, subtle, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Her pulse quickened. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He did not answer directly. Instead, he rose, crouching low and moving toward the edge of the clearing. "Watch," he said, and in the way he moved, she saw the precision of someone who had walked these lands all his life. His hand hovered over his knife, but it was his eyes that struck her most, the dark, unwavering focus that seemed to pierce through the shadows. The desert revealed itself in pieces. A rustle here, a shadow there, the faint glint of a weapon in the dim light. The woman realized that the conflict they were stepping into was far deeper than she had imagined. There were hunters, thieves, Perhaps enemies from the past who had followed the path of rumor and instinct to this canyon. And among them, she sensed, were people who would not hesitate to take what they wanted, whether it was life, secrets, or vengeance. The Apache returned to her side, his movements measured, his eyes scanning the distance one last time. "We must move," he said. "The canyon holds cover, but it also holds traps. Some are set by men, others by the land itself. We must not underestimate either." The woman felt a knot tighten in her chest. The danger was immediate, pressing close, yet she also felt a strange exhilaration. For the first time since she had arrived in the desert, she understood that survival was not passive. It demanded action, strategy, and the courage to step into the unknown. And she would have to trust him, though every instinct told her that trust was a fragile thing, easily broken in these lands. As they began to move again, the canyon narrowing around them, the woman felt the weight of the unseen eyes that followed their progress. Somewhere hidden in the shadows, the story of her arrival was spreading, carried by whispers, wind, and rumor. She realized that she was no longer simply fleeing from the past. She was walking into a conflict that had begun long before she had ever set foot in this land. A conflict that might shape not only her fate, but the fate of the man who had found her. The Apache paused at the mouth of a narrow pass, his gaze sweeping the rugged terrain. "There are paths here that few know," he said. "We will take them. But you must stay close, and you must follow without hesitation." She nodded, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her nerves. Every step felt laden with consequence, and every shadow seemed to hide 1,000 possible dangers. She thought of the prayers she had whispered into the wind, of the desperate plea for someone to find her. Now that she had been found, she realized that survival would not be a gift, it would be earned. Step by step, with vigilance, courage, and perhaps a measure of luck, the canyon walls grew taller, and the path narrower, forcing them to move in single file. She noticed the scars on the rocks, the marks of animals and humans alike, and sensed the weight of history pressing down on her. The land had stories written into every stone, every ridge, and the Apache seemed to know them all. She wondered what he had learned from these lands, what secrets he carried in his mind that had allowed him to navigate danger, loss, and solitude for so long as they pressed forward. The night deepened, and the first hints of dawn began to edge the horizon. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of distant water, perhaps a stream or a hidden spring. The woman felt hope and fear mingling in equal measure. They were not yet safe, and the path ahead promised trials she could not yet see. Yet in the presence of the Apache, she felt a fragile confidence, a sense that even in the vast, unforgiving desert, they might have a chance to survive what was coming. The wind shifted again, carrying with it a faint sound, voices, low and cautious, echoing across the canyon. She froze, her heart pounding. The Apache's hand hovered near his weapon, his body tensing like a coiled spring. "They are close," he whispered. "We are not alone. Stay ready." The woman realized in that moment that the desert was not only a place of survival, it was a stage for the conflicts that lay beneath its surface. Rivalries, grudges, ambitions, and secrets all moved through this land like invisible currents. And now she and the Apache were caught in one of those currents, pushed toward a confrontation that neither could fully anticipate. She swallowed hard and adjusted her footing, ready to follow his lead. Whatever waited in the shadows, she knew that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The canyon had become both a refuge and a trap, a crucible that would test their courage, their trust, and their will to endure. And in the quiet tension of the desert night, the woman realized that the next hours would define more than survival. They would define the story that had only just begun. The first light of dawn crept into the canyon like a cautious intruder, softening the darkness, but revealing every detail of the rugged terrain. The woman moved close to the Apache, every step deliberate, every heartbeat echoing the tension that thrummed between them. The voices they had heard in the distance hours ago had grown louder. Now the sound of movement scraping against rock and sand, carrying a warning she could feel in her bones. Whatever they were facing was close, and the desert had made it clear that hesitation could cost them everything. The Apache led her along a narrow ledge that hugged the canyon wall. Below, the terrain fell sharply, a dangerous drop that would have spelled disaster for anyone misstepping. Above, the rocks jutted outward, creating shadows that concealed threats or perhaps misled the eye. Every instinct she had screamed that they were being watched, that every echo in the canyon could betray their position. She clenched her fists, forcing her fear into a focus that was almost physical. Tangible. "They know we are here," he said without turning. His voice was calm, but the woman could hear the undercurrent of tension. "They are skilled trackers. Do not speak unless I tell you to. Move quietly and keep your eyes sharp." She nodded, swallowing hard, her throat dry. The desert had taught her many things in the days she had been lost. But now she realized that learning to move without drawing attention was a different kind of lesson. Every snap of a twig beneath her boots, every rock dislodged into the canyon, felt like a signal to some unseen enemy. Her pulse throbbed in her temples, her mind straining to calculate every possible danger. They reached a small overhang that jutted out like a natural balcony. From here, they could see the floor of the canyon below, where shadows moved like living things. The Apache crouched low, scanning the area. She saw the glint of knives, the outline of men and women whose intent was unmistakable hunters, or perhaps mercenaries, hardened by the land and by the violence it demanded. Their movements were deliberate, cautious, as if they, too, were aware of the stakes. The woman's stomach twisted. She had hoped that being found by the Apache would mean safety. Yet the tension in the canyon revealed that the desert's dangers were far from over. The enemies below were not aimless wanderers. They had a plan, and the knowledge that they were being observed added a suffocating weight to her chest. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was no safe path down, no easy escape. The cliff walls seemed to close in around her. The narrow ledge, a thin thread between survival and disaster. The Apache leaned closer, his hand brushing hers for a fleeting moment, grounding her in the reality of the present. "We have no choice but to move forward," he said quietly. "They will not give us the chance to retreat. We must be ready for whatever comes." She nodded, her throat tight. The fear that had accompanied her for days was now sharpened into focus, and she realized that the trials of the desert had prepared her for this moment more than she had understood. Yet preparation could only go so far. The uncertainty of the coming confrontation made her pulse race, made the canyon feel alive with threats. They descended slowly, the Apache leading, his movements fluid and precise. He paused when the terrain became treacherous, signaling her to stay back. Every step brought them closer to the shadows below, closer to the enemies whose motives remained hidden. She could hear their voices now, low and tense, their language unfamiliar, but their intent unmistakable. The desert had made them predators, and she was acutely aware that survival depended on vigilance and quick action. A sudden rustle of stone alerted them, and the Apache froze, eyes scanning the cliffs above. For a moment, the canyon seemed suspended in stillness, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The woman felt her heart hammering in her chest, the air thick with anticipation. Then, as abruptly as it had come, the sound faded, leaving only the oppressive silence that made every shadow feel alive. They reached a narrow passage, barely wide enough for two people side by side. The Apache paused, listening, and she mirrored his movements. The canyon seemed to close in around them, rocks looming overhead, casting deep shadows that concealed every detail. Her pulse raced, and she felt the weight of the desert pressing down, a reminder that danger was everywhere, and that the unknown could strike at any moment. "They are close," he whispered, his eyes dark with focus. "Stay behind me. Trust your instincts, and do not hesitate." She followed silently, every sense straining to catch the slightest movement. The canyon floor was uneven, littered with loose stones that could betray their presence with a single misstep. Her hands trembled, not from the chill of the morning air, but from the tension that wound through her body like a taut wire. She had prayed to be found, yet now, standing at the edge of a confrontation she could scarcely comprehend, She wondered if survival was truly possible. Suddenly, a figure stepped into view from behind a boulder, and the Apache reacted instantly. Positioning himself between the woman and the threat, the figure froze, then made a subtle gesture, signaling others that were still hidden in the shadows. The woman's breath caught. There were more of them than she had anticipated. "Do not move," the Apache said, his voice a low growl, steady but edged with urgency. His hand hovered near the hilt of his knife, eyes scanning every shadow for the next threat. The woman could feel the electricity in the air, the tension that made even the smallest movement a potential disaster. The figures below were patient, deliberate, circling the canyon floor, testing their limits. The woman realized that this was not a random encounter. They were being hunted, assessed, and perhaps provoked into revealing themselves. The Apache's presence gave her a strange sense of safety. Yet the sheer numbers and the quiet menace of the canyon pressed on her like a living weight. She felt a flash of movement to her right and instinctively froze. Another figure appeared, this one faster, more daring, testing the boundaries of the canyon. The Apache reacted instantly, stepping forward, his knife catching the early morning light. There was a silent calculation in his movements, a combination of experience and intuition honed over years of navigating danger. The woman could hardly follow his actions, but she felt the power of his presence, the certainty that he would protect her if she trusted him. The canyon seemed to tighten around them as if the land itself were conspiring to heighten the tension. Every rock, every shadow, every faint sound became amplified, a signal that danger was imminent. The woman's pulse raced, her senses heightened to a level she had never known. She realized that the desert was not merely a backdrop, was an active participant in the unfolding confrontation, shaping the stakes, guiding movements, and amplifying the fear. The Apache gestured for her to move along a side path that would give them higher ground. The woman followed, her steps careful, her eyes scanning the canyon floor. Below, the figures had not yet noticed their ascent, and the element of surprise seemed their only advantage. She realized that the balance of power was delicate, that one misstep, one sound, could ignite a chain of events from which there would be no escape. They reached a rocky outcrop that offered a vantage point over the canyon floor. The Apache crouched low, surveying the landscape, and she pressed herself against the stone beside him. From this height, the canyon revealed more of its secret paths, shadows, and the subtle shifts of movement that indicated the positions of the figures below. The woman felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. They were exposed, yet the vantage offered them control. It's a fleeting advantage in the tense standoff. "They are skilled," the Apache murmured, "but they underestimate the desert. And they underestimate us." She nodded, swallowing hard. The words were meant to reassure, yet they carried the weight of warning. Every instinct told her that the confrontation was only beginning, that the coming hours would test courage, skill, and trust in ways she could not yet imagine. She felt the weight of every decision pressing against her, knowing that survival hinged on the smallest actions, the most careful judgments. A distant shout echoed across the canyon, low and urgent, and the figures below began to move with sudden purpose. The tension exploded into motion. The Apache grabbed her arm, pulling her down behind the rocks as arrows whistled past, their tips catching the sunlight like silver threads. The woman's heart leapt into her throat, and she clung to him, her pulse a chaotic drumbeat in the rising storm of danger. The canyon erupted into chaos as movement, sound, and shadow collided. The Apache's skill was evident in every motion, blocking, striking, guiding her through the sudden onslaught. She had never felt danger so immediate, so close, so relentless. The desert, once a silent witness, now roared with life, amplifying every threat, magnifying every heartbeat, every breath, every decision. And through it all, the woman realized that this was the moment she had prayed for, the moment her survival. Her courage and her faith would be tested. Yet even as the battle of wits, skill, and instinct reached its peak, the canyon held secrets yet to reveal, and the figures that hunted them were only part of a larger story that had begun long before either of them had arrived. The wind swept through the canyon, carrying the echo of shouts, the clash of metal, and the whisper of the desert itself. The Apache's eyes never wavered, but the woman could see the tension coiled in his muscles. The silent acknowledgement that the storm had not yet reached its end. Every movement, every decision, would determine the course of the coming hours, and as the sun rose higher, painting the canyon in harsh light, she knew the climax was near. Yet the outcome remained hidden in the shadows, waiting, demanding patience, courage, and every ounce of skill they had. The first strike of sunlight cut across the canyon, catching the dust and sand in a golden glow. The chaos of the night had finally ebbed, leaving only the echo of footsteps, the faint scorch of arrows lodged in the rock, and the quiet breathing of two figures crouched among the stones. The woman's chest heaved, her hands trembling as she lowered herself to the ground, exhausted but alive. The Apache stood nearby, scanning the canyon with unwavering focus, his eyes sharp. But the tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. The storm of the past hours was past, leaving them in the fragile calm of victory tempered by awareness. They had survived. The people who had hunted them, skilled and relentless though they were, had been driven back by the combination of the Apache's knowledge of the land and the woman's unexpected courage. She had seen him move with a precision that seemed almost effortless, guiding her through danger, reading the enemy's intentions with an almost supernatural insight. But she had also played her part, anticipating movements, trusting instincts honed by days of wandering the desert. She realized that courage was not just about facing danger, it was about understanding the land, the people, and oneself. The Apache finally lowered his eyes to her, his expression unreadable at first. Then, in a brief moment of rare softness, he allowed a small nod. "You survived," he said simply. "That is no small thing." "The desert does not grant life easily," she nodded, unable to find words at first. Relief surged through her in waves, mingled with fatigue and disbelief. She had prayed for someone to find her, and now she understood that survival had been about more than just being found. It had been about trust, courage, and the willingness to step into the unknown. She swallowed and finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Thank you. For finding me, for guiding me." He did not smile, not in the way most people would, but there was a faint recognition in his eyes. A subtle acknowledgement that the bond they had forged in the canyon was real and enduring. "You did more than survive," he said. "You endured. That is what the desert demands. And it is not over. There is always more to learn, more to face." For the first time, the woman allowed herself to breathe fully, the weight of fear lifting slowly. She looked around the canyon, the same place that had been a prison of shadows and threats, now bathed in morning light, revealing a rugged beauty she had not noticed before. The desert was harsh and unforgiving, yet it was alive, vibrant, and capable of revealing courage in the hearts of those who dared to face it. Her thoughts turned to the people who had hunted them, to the shadows that had stalked them through the canyon. They had survived, yes, but the desert had reminded her that danger never truly disappeared. It was a force to respect a teacher as harsh as it was wise. And in that realization, she found clarity. Survival was only the first step. To live fully, she would have to carry the lessons of the desert forward, letting them guide her choices and shape her understanding of the world. The Apache moved toward the edge of the canyon, scanning the horizon. His presence was a constant reminder of the balance between strength and wisdom. She realized that he had not simply saved her, he had taught her how to survive, how to read the land, how to trust in both instinct and courage. She understood now that the desert itself was a test, and he was both guide and companion through its trials. When he finally turned back to her, the woman felt a strange mix of gratitude and curiosity. She had wanted answers to questions she had not yet dared to ask. Who he truly was, what had brought him to this canyon, and why he had chosen to stay by her side. Now, in the light of day, she felt safe enough to ask, "Why did you come for me? Why did you answer my prayer?" The Apache regarded her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I do not always know why I act. Some things are instinct, some are duty. But I have learned that when someone is in need, and the desert itself allows it, one must act. You were in need. I acted. Perhaps that is reason enough. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she expected. Actions could speak louder than words, and in the silence of the desert, deeds became a kind of language. She had been found not just by a man, but by the wisdom of a life lived in constant harmony with the land. A life that demanded respect for the power and danger that the desert held. The woman took a tentative step forward, brushing sand from her cloak. The canyon seemed peaceful now, but she knew better than to trust appearances. Survival was never guaranteed, and the desert's lessons lingered, a reminder of vulnerability and strength intertwined. Yet there was also hope, a sense that the hardships they had faced together had forged a connection that would endure beyond the canyon. The Apache moved beside her, silent but present. The path ahead was uncertain, winding through hills and valleys. But now she faced it with clarity and courage she had not possessed when she first wandered into the desert. She had prayed for help, and now she understood that the desert had given her more than protection. It had given her insight, resilience, and the knowledge that she could face what came next. They began to walk again, leaving the canyon behind. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a landscape of sand, rock, and wind, but it no longer seemed hostile. The danger that had stalked them was behind, though not forgotten. And the lessons learned in the shadows would guide them forward. Every step carried awareness. Every glance held the memory of the struggle and triumph that had brought them here. The woman felt a quiet, strength growing within her, a confidence born not from luck, but from endurance. She had faced the unknown, trusted another human being, discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. And as they moved across the sunlit desert, she realized that the journey was far from over, but the greatest obstacle. Her own uncertainty and doubt had been faced and overcome. The Apache spoke after a while, breaking the silence that had accompanied them for miles. The desert always tests, and it will always test again. But those who learn its ways carry strength beyond measure. She looked at him, seeing the depth of experience, the quiet wisdom that had guided them through peril. She felt gratitude, respect, something deeper recognition that survival and understanding were intertwined, and that her prayer had been answered in a way far richer than she had imagined. "I understand," she said softly, "and I will remember." They walked on, the canyon behind them shrinking into the horizon, the desert stretching wide and golden before them. Each step forward was a promise to honor what had been learned, a testament to courage, resilience, and the subtle power of trust. The woman realized that while the desert had tested them, it had also revealed the best parts of their human spirit, the will to survive, the capacity for bravery, and the quiet understanding that no one truly endures alone. As the sun climbed higher, warming the sand and painting the rocks with color, the woman and the Apache moved steadily, side by side. The desert, harsh and beautiful, had changed them both. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and the shadows of the past, and emerged not just alive, but transformed. She felt gratitude not only for the man who had found her, but for the desert itself, with all its lessons, trials, and silent wisdom. Eventually they paused at a rise overlooking a distant valley. Where the wind carried the promise of water and shelter, the Apache crouched, scanning the landscape, then turned to her with a rare softness. "This is as far as we go together," he said. "From here, your path continues. You know the land, you know the trials, and you know yourself. The desert has given you its lessons. Now it is yours to walk." The woman nodded, feeling the weight of those words, the responsibility and the empowerment contained within them. She had come seeking someone to save her, but she realized now that salvation had been more than protection. It had been the teaching of endurance, the awakening of courage, and the discovery of trust. She looked out over the valley, the sun bathing the land in golden light, and felt a profound sense of peace. The journey was far from over, but she had the tools to face it. She turned to the Apache, her eyes meeting his one last time, silent gratitude passing between them. Then she began to descend into the valley, each step confident, aware, alive. The Apache watched her go, his eyes lingering on her figure as she became smaller against the vastness of the desert. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into the canyon, a shadow among shadows, carrying his own stories, his own lessons, and the quiet satisfaction of having guided another through the trials of the land he had known all his life. The desert stretched endless and eternal, a place of challenge, beauty, and life lessons written in dust and wind. For the woman, it had become a teacher, a guide, and a witness to courage and trust. And as she moved forward, the memory of the canyon, the Apache, and the trials they had endured together would remain with her forever, a reminder that even in the harshest places, hope, resilience, and human connection could endure. She paused briefly, taking a deep breath of the dry, warm air, and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for rescue this time, but for strength, guidance, and the wisdom to carry forward the lessons of the desert. The land around her was alive with possibility, danger, and beauty, and she felt ready to meet it all. The sun climbed higher. The canyon disappeared behind the horizon, and the desert, timeless and patient, watched over her journey. The woman moved forward, not alone, not helpless, but carrying the courage, knowledge, and resilience that the desert hand, the man who had found her, had given her. The story of fear, prayer, and survival had found its resolution, leaving behind reflection, hope, and the enduring truth that even in the harshest places, human spirit and courage could prevail.